Well, everyone, welcome to another round of this year's speaker series. I'm so happy to have you all here. I'm Ryan Zuccaro. I'm the director of the Next Steps Transition Program at the Ideal, which is our life skills program for students who are generally between 18 and 21. Tonight, I'm really excited to introduce and welcome Alison Morris, who will be speaking on the A to Z of special education cases. Alison is an attorney at Cuddy Law Firm who focuses her practice on special education advocacy, litigation, and special needs planning. She is also a co-chair of the New York State Bar Association's Committee on Disability Rights and the Westchester Women's Bar Association's Education Committee. Alison graduated summa cum laude from Pace Law School. While at Pace, she worked on cases for children with special needs in the Disability Rights Clinic and interned for the Department of Justice in the Disability Rights section. Alison lives in Westchester, New York, and is the proud sister of a special needs child. And with that said, I'll pass it over to Alison, who I'm sure has a lot to cover tonight.
Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you guys so much for having us. Let me get this up and going. There we go. So yes, it's so nice to be here and speak with you guys. I'm Allie. I'm a senior attorney at the Cuddy Law Firm, and we do special education and special needs planning, which is a really holistic approach to helping a family who has a special needs individual. So on the special education planning side, on the special education side, we do special education litigation. So suing school districts when they're not giving students what they need, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end. I also have a special education advocacy practice. So I assist families at the IEP, Individualized Education Program meetings, trying to get in on that front end and help school districts create appropriate programs. I also help families navigate the OPWDD, Office for People with Developmental Disabilities system, those applications and eligibility and those services. And then we also have special needs planning attorneys who help families with wills, special needs trusts, guardianships, advanced directives. We certainly are not the only firm who provide these services, but it's a nice holistic approach to helping a family who has a special needs family member. And, the most important thing I think Ryan said is my younger brother, Ryan, I say younger, he towers over me at this point. He's going to be 29 this month. He has special needs. He has an intellectual disability. And so I was going to his IEP meetings. And so I've been where a lot of you might be now, or, are starting that process. So I certainly understand where a lot of you are. And so without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is just quickly go over the federal law that covers individuals who have special needs and need those extra special protections when they're in school, the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is where those extra protections in school come from. And if you ever hear abbreviations, acronyms, there's so many of them in the special education and special need world. If you're ever at a meeting going over reports, talking with someone and they use one and you don't know it or remember it, do not ever feel silly or like you're the only one who doesn't know what that acronym is. Always feel like you can ask them at the meeting or even send an email after, hey, what did that stand for? But if you've ever heard someone say, oh, you're entitled to FAPE, your child's entitled to FAPE, that stands for free and appropriate public education. That's what the IDEA entitles students with special needs. And there's an emphasis on services designed to meet individual needs. That is certainly the buzzword for today's presentation. We could play a game to it every time I say it, have a sip of your tea. That's what I have. That is really the main takeaway for today. Everything has to be based on the individual's needs. And that's what the federal law and New York's regulations really highlight and promote. There's something called the least restrictive environment, LRE, if you ever hear them saying that acronym or abbreviation. And that's the federal law wants students with disabilities to be integrated with typically developing peers as much as possible and to the extent appropriate. But remember the buzzword, everything has to be based on the individual's needs. So if they need a more restrictive setting, if they need a smaller class size, if they need adaptive physical education, sometimes called APE, then that's what they need and that's what they should be getting. Oh no. And so I just quickly also want to let people know Right now, under the law in New York, your child has the right to be in school through 21. In New York, depending on your birthday, you might be in school till 21 or 22. There is a proposal to just make it straight 23. So hopefully that happens. And there is a 2-year statute of limitations for bringing those due process complaints, bringing a case against a school district. So if there are issues, we really always tell families to speak with someone, an advocate, attorney, as soon as possible. I also just want to let people know that in the IDEA itself, it has a section for the purpose. What is the purpose of the IDEA? And it says, yes, it's to ensure students have that FAPE afforded to them and their services to, right, buzzword, meet their individual needs. But per the purpose, it also needs to meet their needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So yes, we certainly need to address school age issues and reading and writing and social skills, but they also need to make sure they are addressing how this student and individual and their needs for life after school, their independent living needs, their employment needs, and their post-secondary education needs. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but certainly I always want families to know that, and that's part of the IDEA, and they certainly can talk about that and note that at meetings if they're sort of getting pushback that that's not what we're here for, because it is what you're there for. And so some red flags to be aware of, as we go through. Is there missing information? Are assessments on, the student or the child not accurate, right? Maybe Johnny has sensory issues and you get the occupational therapy report back and it says, Johnny doesn't have any sensory issues. And you're going to say, this isn't my child, right? This isn't quite accurate. Maybe evaluations aren't done at all, or they're not done timely. We're going to see why that's so critical. And goals are just cut and pasted. They're really not buzzword, right? Meeting the individual's needs. And we're going to see why these things can be so critical. So what is that IEP, that individualized education program? If there's a student who is found eligible for special education programming under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, they're entitled to an IEP, an individualized education program. That IEP, that document, has to be, the legal standard is it must be reasonably calculated to enable the student to make meaningful progress in light of their circumstances. Well, what does that mean? It means a few things. One, it means that this student has to make more than trivial progress, which is what New York was really doing before this 2017 Supreme Court case came down. New York really has always been saying that. And again, what's meaningful for one child might not be meaningful for another, right? Everything is based on buzzword, their individual needs. So meaningful progress for one student might be going from 1 word to 3 words. Meaningful progress for another student might not be 1 to 3 words. They might need to have made more progress than that, right? Everything is individualized. And so, right, there's that buzzword. It has to be personalized to each student's unique needs, right? Meaningful progress in light of their circumstances. So we're not comparing Susie and Sally and Timmy and Tommy and grouping them all together. No. We're looking at Tommy and what are his needs and issues and what's going to get him to make progress. And is this progress in light of his needs and issues? We're not sort of comparing everyone together. And so I want to go through the IEP section so that everyone's aware of what those are, so that you can also know if something's not quite right, what you might want to talk about with your school district. So when you first get an IEP, on the first page, the top of it, the first 2 pages has this first bullet information, the classification of the student, the implementation date of the IEP, and the evaluative information reviewed. The implementation date is when this IEP is good through, right? So that's important to look at because maybe you have your annual IEP meeting in March or April of 2023. Maybe you make some changes, maybe there's an increase in services, and you think, okay, this is going to start right away. But when you get that IEP, it might not start until September of the following year. So you might want to speak with the district and say, wait, we have 2 more months of school. We can start this now, right? So you always want to look at everything on the IEP and review all documents as soon as you get them. The first few pages are also going to have evaluative information reviewed. That's information the district provided, and it should include information you've provided the district. So again, you want to go through and make sure what they're listing is accurate, right? Sometimes just by mistake, or it might be for another purpose, but sometimes it has a document that wasn't discussed at the meeting. You want to make sure that that's taken out. All right, it says, progress report from OT evaluator. We didn't get one of those. That shouldn't be listed there. So not only do you want to make sure all the documents listed are accurate, you want to look at and make sure the scores they're reporting from those assessments are accurate, right? I've seen, and again, sometimes they're typographical errors, but it says, full scale IQ 76 when it was really a 96, right? So you want to go through and make sure the information that's on there is accurate. One of the most important things there is the classification. So in order to have an IEP, diagnosis does not equal disability classification for IEP purposes. In order to get an IEP, you have to meet one of 13 disability classifications. So sometimes you might talk with someone and say, oh, your child has an IEP. What's their classification? And they might say something like dyslexia or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But those are diagnoses. For an IEP, those need to fit in disability categories, and they need to be impacting the student's ability to make educational progress. That's how you get an IEP. So you want to make sure you know and understand what your child's classification is and that it's appropriate. So some examples of classifications include autism, speech language impairment, right? If they have articulation issues or a language disorder, intellectual disability, orthopedic impairment, learning disability, if they have a learning disorder, and other health impairment is the one that's most closely correlated if a student does have ADHD. So you want to make sure you know and understand your child's disability classification. Their classification does not dictate or should not dictate their services, right? They need to get whatever they need, regardless of their classification. However, if a student has autism, there's certain additional regulatory protections that they get. And it's important that the classification is supposed to be what is impacting the student's ability to make progress. And so if a student has, for instance, autism, but what the classification says is speech language impairment or other health impairment, right? There could be an issue when there's a substitute teacher or a related service provider who's picking up this IEP, because that's the first thing they're going to see is what's their classification. And they might not understand the full weight or gravity of issues that the student might have if it's not the appropriate classification. What do you do if there's multiple disability diagnoses that could fall under different classifications? So for instance, my brother has intellectual disability. He also has dyslexia and dysgraphia, learning disorders in reading and writing, and dyscalculia, learning disorder in math, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So technically, he could be under intellectual disability classification, learning disorder classification, or other health impairment classification. If you know the regs, learning disability sort of gets crossed out, but you want it to be the most accurate, the reason that they're not making progress. And again, when people pick up that IEP, they're going to see that classification. If he got classified as an other health impairment, they might just think he's an overactive boy who has attention deficit disorder. They might not really understand he has an intellectual disability, and there's a lot of other things going on here. This is not just a student who has attention-related issues. So his classification was intellectual disability. So if there's multiple disabilities and they could fall under multiple classifications, it should be the one that is the reason they're not making progress, right? Maybe they have a learning disorder and they have attention deficit disorder, right? Which is the reason they're not making progress. Maybe it's their attention issues. Maybe it's the learning disorder. Both diagnoses should be on the IEP, but you want to make sure that classification is the most appropriate. The next section are the present levels of performance. These are the pages that take up the, other than the goals, the most of the IEP. There's 4 areas that there's present level of performance information in, and you want these sections to be detailed. I'm not saying 20, 30, 40 pages devoted to this information, but We need details. And that's for two reasons. One, goals on the IEP are based on the present levels of performance information. So for instance, if Johnny has social skill issues and doesn't understand nonverbal cues or humor or sarcasm and thinks doesn't understand if individuals are maybe picking on him, they need to know that so that there can be goals on the IEP to address that. Because one of two things are going to happen. Either it's going to be vague information in the present level section, and so there's not really going to be an appropriate goal, right? Maybe there's a social goal saying he needs to work on social skills, but it's not going to quite be tailored to his needs. Or if the information is not in the present level information, there might not be a goal to address it. Or there might be a goal, but again, it might not be really addressing what their actual issue is. So we need the present level information to give us those details so we can make goals to address those needs. The second reason we want details is it's another way to monitor the student's progress, right? Let's say Johnny's in third grade and he has reading issues, reading, writing issues, right? If his IEPs keep saying year after year, Johnny's in the third grade and, reading is hard for him, but he makes such great effort. He's such a joy to have in class. Keep up the reading. We have no idea if every year they're saying that, where is he actually at? What can he actually do? Does he know his letters? Can he read? Can he put a sentence together? If, however, they give some details, Johnny's in third grade, he's reading at about a first grade reading level. His spelling is at about a second grade level. He can only write one sentence, but without appropriate punctuation. If next year's IEP has him ahead 2 grade levels in reading, so now he's 1 year under in reading, his spelling has improved, and now he's writing, punctuation is still an issue though, and that hasn't made progress. Now we know where we have to make some changes and add some things and take away some things, right? We need those details. Special factors, again, sometimes districts just take for granted some information. If they don't see it's an issue, these are on the IEP. These are boxes that are checked off yes or no. So for instance, if the school district doesn't think that there's a behavior issue, they might check no for needing a behavior plan. But if you feel like, wait, I'm getting emails from this teacher, weekly or even daily, could we talk about behavior plan or assistive technology? You guys are saying checking off no, but what is assistive technology? Why are we saying no? Maybe we need to do an evaluation to see if Johnny needs this, right? You can sort of talk through these things and make them go through and explain. Maybe it does need to be checked off as a yes now. Maybe it shouldn't be a no. I think, sometimes, again, they just take some things for granted, but you certainly can and should be going through all of these if need be. The next section on the IEP, the year a student is going to turn 15 in New York. Federal law says 16. New York said 15. So federal law said 16. New York said we're doing it a year earlier. The year a child is going to turn 15, the school district has to start transition planning, meaning preparing them for life after high school. That means the district has to say, what do we have to start doing now to get this student ready for life after high school? We want to get information on their interests and what they want to do, broadly speaking, like big umbrella goals in education, employment, and independent living. Do they want to be a cop? Do they want to be a veterinary assistant? Do they want to work with kids or cars? Do they want to go to college like their siblings? Do they want to go to a 2-year school or a vocational school? Do they want to live at home? Do they want to live in a dorm? Do they want to live with their boyfriend or girlfriend in a house far away from mom and dad? That's what my brother would always say, right? The realistic nature of their preferences and wants are irrelevant, because what they need to do next is, in addition to goals for academic and functional issues, right? Reading, writing, math, spelling, social skills. In addition to all those goals on the IEP, once the student turns 15, now they have to add goals to address this transition plan. So Johnny wants to be a cop. Maybe being a cop is truly not in Johnny's cards, and that's not something that's attainable. That's okay. We can put goals on the IEP. Does Johnny know how to be socially appropriate at school, at work? Does Johnny know how to dress appropriately? Does Johnny know how to do time management for tasks? Does Johnny know how to interview for a job, right? There are still skills that we can work on and goals that we can put on this IEP, regardless of whether the umbrella goal is unattainable, right? Johnny wants to live in a home with his girlfriend or boyfriend. Maybe Johnny is going to need, supervision for the rest of his life. Okay, does Johnny know how to do laundry? Can Johnny cook a few things? Does Johnny know how to budget and go to the grocery store? So again, they can still put goals on this IEP to address the student's transition plan goals. We're going to talk about goals in a little bit, but what's really important to know is that if your child or the student has an IEP, in addition to getting a report card, just like every other student, you are entitled to get an IEP goal progress report. All the goals on that IEP, they need to send you how they're doing in those goals. Are they making progress? Are they not making progress? Have they achieved half of their goals? Are they not even close to achieving some of these goals and it's not going to happen this year? Your IEP will tell you when you are supposed to get those IEP goal progress reports. Is it the same time as you get a report card? Is it, every trimester? And if you don't have those, that's a red flag. You should speak to your district and say, haven't gotten this IEP goal progress report. And again, once you get documents, look them over. If there's goals that they say Johnny's achieved, and you're like, there's no way Johnny has achieved this goal. It says Johnny knows all 26 letters of the alphabet, and he can't even point out T to me. Call an IEP meeting. If Johnny has achieved a lot of goals or hasn't, right, you might want to call a meeting to say, what do we need to do midway through the year to refocus these goals? Either get more challenging goals, or maybe we went too high and we need more foundational goals. The next part of the IEP is the recommended program. Right there, we're talking about class size. So if they're going to be in general education, that part is usually left blank. But then it gets more restrictive from there, right? So are they going to be in ICT classes, integrated co-teaching? That's the same as a gen ed class, the same amount of students, right? 28, 32, 35 students. But in addition to the teacher, there's also a second certified special education teacher in the classroom to help support the students who have IEPs and then 504 plans. And then they can also help the other students in the class. Then it may get more restrictive. Do they need a class size of 15 1-to-1 or 15 to 1, 15 students and one certified special education teacher, 12 1-1, 12 students, one certified special education teacher and one teaching assistant, right? More and more restrictive, right? The more and more their needs are. Again, everything is based on their needs. Let's say there's a student with autism or high functioning autism and science and math are their thing. But English and social studies, where it's a lot more reading and abstract thinking, is not their thing. Maybe the student can be in general education or honors, math and science classes, but maybe they need integrated co-teaching or 15-to-1 classes for English and social studies. If that's what they need, then that's what should be on the IEP. So for instance, my brother was in a life skills program, very small, restrictive class size, but he was in all specials with regular education students, and he was in PE with regular education students, because that's what was appropriate for him. Just because you're in a special ed class doesn't mean you have to go into adaptive physical education or, specials like art and music with only special education students. You get what you need. So again, buzzword, that's what it is based on. The next section are accommodations, right? What does this student need to be on the same playing field with other students, right? Do they need modified work? Maybe the student has a learning disability. Maybe they have dysgraphia, a learning disorder in writing. And right now, it's really not appropriate to penalize them for spelling errors. Let's work on their writing, get that a little bit stronger, and not penalize them for spelling right now. Let's get that on the IEP. Do they need breaks, sensory breaks, a sensory diet? Do they need a 1-to-1 paraprofessional with them? Test accommodations that they need. Do they need extra time? Do they need a separate test environment, quiet space? Do they need a scribe? Do they need someone repeating directions or clarifying directions, right? Whatever they need, you want to make sure it's on the IEP. Again, some people are in great schools or great districts and they say, well, whatever they need, we'll do it. Problem is, if it's not on the IEP, and someone else comes in, a substitute, someone else, they're going to say it's not on the IEP. You don't have to give it. So you want to make sure whatever they need, it's on the IEP. The next section is related services. What services do they need? How often and in what group size? Again, based on what they need, not what the district can offer. Do they need speech services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, feeding therapy, music therapy, applied behavior analysis, ABA? What do they need? Do they need it twice a week? Do they need it twice a week, one-to-one, right? Really individualized. Do they need it twice a week, one-to-one, and once a week in a group to help generalize the skills, get some social skills going, right? What do they need? It should not be, this is what we offer, so this is what you're getting. Everything has to be based on what they need. For summer services, ESY, extended school year services, that, per the regulations, is not to help keep promoting progress, right? Unfortunately, per the law, it's only to prevent substantial regression. So, right, if at the end of the year, they're here, and by the time they come back in September, they're going to lose the skills they acquired, and we need to keep that baseline going. That's what summer services are for. Again, some schools, some districts are great, and they say, listen, we'll give it so they can keep going. But you really want to make sure you're talking up about summer services for what do they need to keep that baseline, right? They're going to lose the language skills over summer. They're going to lose the social skills. They're going to lose the movement, the balance, right? What is going to happen if they don't get a service over the summer? Because it's only to prevent substantial regression, right? Maybe they get occupational therapy 4 times a week during the school year. But for some, again, some school districts say 4 times a week during the school year, they'll get it 4 times a week during the summer. Other school districts, right, take a really narrow look. Hey, what do they need to just make sure they do not regress? So maybe they get it 4 times a week during the school year, but over summer, they're only going to get it twice a week because it's just to make sure they do not regress over the summer. And again, it's based on what they need. If they need academics over the summer, okay, academics over the summer. If they need related services, okay, they need related services. If they only need counseling to make sure their anxiety does not increase or their social skills do not regress, then that's all they need over summer. It's based on what they need. Sorry, the coaster attached to my tea. The last part of the IEP sections are once you're 15 and older and you have that transition plan. And again, that's the year the student turns 15. So if you have an IEP meeting when your child's 14 in June, but in October, they're going to be 15, they either need to talk about transition planning at that meeting in June, or they need to have another meeting in October. It is the year the student turns 15. So once they turn 15 and start having a transition plan, at the back of the IEP, there's going to be a coordinated set of transition activities. It's going to say what they're getting to help promote that transition plan and who is responsible for it. Again, you want to read through the document. It really shouldn't say parent for anything, but it certainly shouldn't say parent for everything. So you want to see what they're saying, they're doing, and who's responsible for it. You can get transition planning services in the area of instruction, related services, activities of daily living, pre-vocational services, and community experiences. So, maybe they're already in a life skills class, but maybe they need to take a life skills class. Maybe they need to take a language class, right? Maybe they want to go to a college, a community college, and they've been exempted from taking a language, but to go to college, they're going to need it. So we need to work out what can we do for the next few years to get them a language credit, right? Maybe they need to do that. Related services, again, maybe they're already getting speech, OT, PT, occupational therapy, and physical therapy, but maybe they need more of it now, right? Because now we're looking at what do they need to be as ready as possible for once they graduate. So maybe they're getting occupational therapy twice a week, but now we really need to make sure they're working on their daily living skills, their hygiene, they're being out in the community, and maybe occupational therapy needs to increase. Acquisition of daily living skills is the one I would make sure they are addressing. A lot of times it will say not applicable, or student will be living at home. I don't know anyone with an IEP, without an IEP, who doesn't have some sort of daily living skill need. I'm 34 and still have living skill needs. So, always look at the IEP and make sure they're addressing their needs. If it's reminders for hygiene, if it's going out, being socially appropriate, budgeting, understanding how to use a debit card, travel training, right? Any type of daily living skill issue, that they're aware of it and that they're addressing it. Participation in state assessments or alternate assessments, right? So in New York, we have the regions. So if you're in classes, you're being taught your curriculum for the end goal of taking a Regents. That's what they're teaching you towards. In New York State, 1% of all students in New York State, so not in Westchester, not in each borough, not in Scarsdale, 1% of all New York State is allowed to have students be alternately assessed. And it's supposed to be reserved for the most significantly cognitively impaired students. Certainly if there's a student who doesn't fall into that, but as they're getting up in age and grade and it's clear that it is not working, you certainly can talk with your district and see what they can do. And what happens if you're alternately assessed, you are still being taught English, science, social studies, math, but they are modifying the curriculum. Certainly they might be modifying the curriculum if you're being state assessed, but here they are not teaching towards the Regents. So what they are teaching and how they are teaching it is different, right? Math class might be learning money versus learning algebra, right? So you want to look and make sure that you are aware, have they put your child to be alternately assessed? Again, parents need to be aware of this. Sometimes school districts take it for granted and put a child to be marked as alternately assessed. Parents have to be aware of it. It doesn't mean that it might not be appropriate, but you certainly should be aware of it. My brother was alternately assessed. He knows more about planets and the solar system than I do. I still have to ask him when we go to the Museum of Natural History, which is the planet with the rings around it. So certainly it does not mean that they are just doing whatever they want in class, but it's modified. They're not being taught for the Regents. The next section on the IEP is participation with students without disabilities. Again, LRE, least restrictive environment. They want students participating and being involved with students who are typically developing. So if this is a student who is being taken out of the general education curriculum or being taken out of PE class or electives like music and art, they need to say that on the IEP and they need to say why. So again, you want to read through that because you might read through it and say, wait a minute, I didn't even know we agreed to do this, but they need to say it and need to say why. The next section is special transportation. Does Johnny need transportation to and from school? Does he need a bus paraprofessional? Does he need a harness? Does he need bus to be air conditioned in the summer, right? Maybe there's a sensory issue. Maybe there's Hashimoto's thyroid disease. And if there is any issue with overheating, it's going to be a medical emergency. You want to make sure they know about that. And again, it's on the IEP. The last section of the IEP, the bottom of your IEP is the placement. And that's because you are supposed to spend the IEP meeting talking about the students' present levels, what goals they need, what services they need. The last question is, where is the place that has this program? If it's in the district, how fantastic. But it should not be, this is what we do. This is what we can offer. We can only do it twice a week, so that's what we're giving you. If the program is in fact what the district can offer, then the district is going to be providing the program. But it certainly should not be, well, we can do X, so they're getting X when they really need Y. And again, certainly maybe families are saying, we want them in the district, we're willing to try X, let's see how it goes. But it's a bit of a red flag if that's happening. I said evaluations are important, and they are, and we're going to talk about them now. So when you come into the special education realm, you get initial evaluations, which are a psychological, a social history, which is a conversation with the parents. You get a medical, which you get your child's doctor to fill out, and you get a class observation, someone going in and observing the child. And then you also are entitled to any other assessments in all areas of suspected disability and evaluations in all areas of need whether or not they're related to the suspected disability. So, right, if a student is suspected of having ADHD or being classified with other health impairment, the school district cannot say, well, we're not going to do a speech language impairment because that's not related to ADHD and other health impairment. They can't say that. They have to address all areas of need. After that initial evaluation, the district is required to do evaluations, these triennial reevaluations every 3 years. They're allowed, you guys can do evaluations in between that time frame if you ask for it and the district agrees to it. Sometimes a school district will send you a consent form to say, hey, the 3 years is up. We don't think they need anything. We would not suggest signing that. And that's because we need the data. Certainly what parents are seeing, what teachers see in between those 3 years is important and critical, but we need the standardized data. Think about where you, or if you're here for a child, where they were 3 years ago, right? If on those initial evaluations, they were in the 3rd percentile for receptive and expressive language, right? How much they can understand and how much they can put out. 3 years later, we want to know where they're at. Have they made progress? Are they the same? Have they regressed? And we need this because we need the IEP. We need to know their needs. We need to have goals, and we need to know how much services they need, right? If they've made progress, maybe their services can be reduced. If they've stagnated or regressed, we know we might need to do something else here. So we need that data and those evaluations. If there's any area, if you're getting those reevaluations, those 3 years are up, you want to make sure they're evaluating in all areas that the student is receiving services in, right? So make sure they're not just doing those 4 required evaluations. Meanwhile, your child is getting speech, OT, and PT, and they're not evaluating, right? We want that data. If there's a new area of need, let them know. And if they did an evaluation a year or 2 ago in a new area of need, you want them to reevaluate, and we'll talk about why. And so what are some evaluations, right? Psychoeducational, psychological, neuropsychological. School districts can do neuropsychologicals. They have to contract out for them because school psychologists do not do them. And what a neuropsychological is a psychoeducational, if they divide them up like this, a psychoeducational is just going to be doing academic testing, reading, writing, math, spelling skills. The psychological will look into their cognitive profile, their IQ. A neuropsychological will do both of those things. It will be much more thorough and comprehensive. It will diagnose, which the other evaluations cannot do. And it will give specific program and service recommendations, right? They should get evaluated in this area. They should be getting this type of service. They should be in a class of XYZ. But again, those diagnoses are a critical difference for a neuropsych evaluation, right? Any areas of related service, if they need a speech device, if they're not talking and they've not had an assistive technology evaluation, that's a bit of a red flag. You should ask for that. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know all these evaluations, that's okay. It should be enough that you can write to your district and say, Johnny is having issues when he goes up and down the stairs. He's falling a lot. He also, is finding it really hard to get out the word he wants to say. Can you help me? And the school district should be able to say, hey, we need to do an occupational therapy and speech language evaluation here. So you don't necessarily need to be doing that. If you know the name, great, say, hey, we want an OT evaluation, but don't feel like you have to know every single evaluation inside and out. The 2 biggest ones are those on the bottom, just checking time. The 2 biggest ones are on the bottom, an FBA and BIP, functional behavioral assessment and behavioral intervention plan. If your child's having any behavior issues, this is one that you might want to ask for if they haven't. An FBA is someone coming in, observing your child over at least, a month. Taking data to figure out why they're engaging in behaviors. Are they avoiding work that's too hard? Are they avoiding work that's too easy and they need to be challenged more? Are they doing things to get a sensory interaction? Are they avoiding tasks? Do they want attention? And then if the behaviors are intense or severe enough, they'll create a behavior intervention plan. How do we reduce these behaviors and stop them here before they get to here? Again, I said we'd talk about goals. We're there. Annual goals have to be a few things. One, they have to be tailored to each student's individual needs. So again, that buzzword, if you've got, goals on the IEP and Johnny's got a reading issue and there's a reading goal, how fantastic. But if Johnny's in the 5th grade and reading at a 3rd grade level, and the goal is Johnny's going to read his 5th grade text and, write a paragraph, that goal's not really tailored to him. We need to address the fact that he's 2 grade levels below in reading, right? So we really want to make sure the goals are individualized. Goals have to be measurable. There's 2 things I mean there. One, we want to make sure goals are not compound as much as they don't need to be. Sometimes there might be more than one thing in a goal, but to the extent possible, sometimes they need to break goals down. Right, the sort of prominent example is Johnny will write a 1 paragraph with appropriate spelling and capitalization, and will peer review his work and have an appropriate topic sentence. And there's so much in that goal. If they say he achieved it, did he do all of that? If they say he didn't achieve it, did he do any of that? It's too much in the goal to measure. They need to break that down. And the other part is how they're measuring it. They will say on the IEP how they are measuring the goal. Is it based on data or is it based on reviewer observation? Again, sometimes things need to be based on observation. A lot of times that's for counseling goals. And even if it's based on observation, they still need to be taking data about what they observed when and what happened. But to the extent possible, you want as much to be based on data, homework, assignments, quizzes, right? So that way, if they say Johnny's not achieving the goal, Johnny is achieving the goal, you can say, I want the data. I want to see what you're basing this on. Goals also have to be meaningful. And again, this is every student. What's meaningful for one might not be meaningful for another. So the example I give is in my brother Ryan's last or second to last year of high school, right? So his time to get school age services is running out. They had a goal for him to continue to improve his reading level, like his grade level in reading. And my dad and I sort of looked at each other and looked at them and said, guys, they're going to be working on reading, but in terms of goals and what they're doing, we need to work on the daily living skills, right? The social skills, the hygiene, the daily living skills, the being appropriate out in the community, the money, those things. That's what we need to work on here. That's what's meaningful for us right now. Other students, other friends of his certainly kept those types of goals. So again, what's meaningful for one student does not necessarily mean it's meaningful for another. So everyone's got to figure that out for themselves, but you want to make sure the goals are meaningful. And I also want to make sure people know goals are to be academic and functional. That's in the IDEA, the federal law. So yes, we need reading, writing, math, spelling goals if appropriate, but we also need those social skill goals, the sensory goals, the daily living skill goals, right? Because again, we need to get them ready for life after school. And if they're 13 and still not toileting independently, we certainly need a goal for that. So the Committee on Special Education, I'm going to talk about the composition on the next slide, but you guys are entitled to timely notice of IEP meetings, those Committee on Special Education meetings. You're entitled to written notice 5 days before the meeting that says the meeting's purpose and who is going to be attending. And the meeting is to be at a mutually convenient time and location, right? So if they're calling you up 2 days before a meeting and saying, hey, it's going to be on Tuesday, that's not quite appropriate. If they're also not really letting you know who's going to be there, you have a right to know who's going to be there. And certainly look at those when you get them, because if you look and Johnny gets speech, OT, and PT, but none of his providers are at this meeting, you can say, hey guys, I need these people at the meeting so we can Team Johnny needs to be here. You guys also, the regulations and case law make clear parents have to be meaningful participants. School districts cannot just have you come to these meetings to check off that you are there and tell you this is what your child's program is going to be. The caveat there is they do not need to agree with what a parent wants. They do have to consider it, right? So if a parent wants X and the district says, we think Y is appropriate, they need to consider why you're saying X is what the student needs. They do not need to agree with it, but they cannot sort of off the cuff or off the bat just say, we're not even listening to you. Part of that meaningful parent participation and there's some guidance on this. It's not quite as clear, but it certainly is having the opportunity to review evaluations, right? If there's evaluations or progress reports or documents coming down, especially the evaluations, you should not be getting those. Parents should not be getting those the day of, the day before. You certainly should get those at least when you get the meeting notice, at least that week before. And that's because you need to have time to review it, right? You need to review the evaluations and reports, read through them, see what you agree with and don't agree with, what do you have questions on. And if you get them, the day of the meeting or before, you're not going to have enough time to hear someone summarize that document. You're reading through it and then they're going to move on. It's not fair. So certainly we've had, tell families, right, you can say, hey, we just got these, we need to reschedule. Maybe if you get a 1-page document, you can say, hey, give me 10 minutes, let me read this and then we can convene. There's sort of different options you can go with. It goes both ways though. Try to give the district documents that you have, as far in advance as possible. Any independent evaluations, letters from private evaluators, developmental pediatricians, get them to them as soon as possible. So the Committee on Special Education, the most important takeaway here is parents are part of that. So sometimes districts say the committee has decided or the committee thinks. Parents are part of the Committee on Special Education. It's also special education teachers, general education teachers, related service providers, school psychologists, a CSE chairperson, that's the representative, sometimes they're the same person. That's the tiebreaker, right? So if you say Johnny needs X and the speech pathologist says, I think Johnny needs Y, the chairperson has to make a decision because they have to get an IEP out for the student. Certainly I've seen it go the district's way more often, but I have seen the CSE chairperson maybe split the baby in the middle and see if the parent's okay with that, or go with what the parent wants. So I have seen it go that way too. Parents also are allowed to invite anyone who has knowledge or special expertise on their child. The parent gets to decide that, the district doesn't. So you can invite a neighbor, a friend, you certainly can have doctors, therapists coming to the child's meeting. For students with autism, again, that first bullet is what the regulations have as some extra protections. Parents with students with autism have to have parent counseling and training sessions on the IEP. Anyone can have that service. Anyone can have parent counseling and training sessions, but if a student has autism, the district has to be providing it. And then the other bullets are just other considerations to make sure are being brought up at meetings, right? Do they need a methodology like TEACH or ABA, applied behavior analysis? Do they need a communication device or assistive technology device? Are we addressing their social skills, their daily living skills, any behavior or sensory issues, right? Are those getting addressed? And what can parents do to be prepared? Keep, all your educational files, make sure you read them as soon as possible. One of the maybe only good things to come out of COVID is a lot more things were being put in writing. So always, keep things in writing. If you have a verbal conversation, follow it up in writing. Hi, just confirming you said you were going to correct that transportation is, maximum 45 minutes, right? Sometimes they will forget a verbal conversation, but in case anything more nefarious is going on, you have in writing detailing what the conversation was. Another great thing, out of COVID that sort of I've told parents to keep going is you provide your own samples, right? Take videos, handwriting samples, right? They're saying Johnny's handwriting is perfect, and you've got Johnny writing 2 words. It takes up the entire, page. So provide your own samples to say, this is what we're seeing. Participate in meetings, use advocates and attorneys, if you feel necessary, if things are not, going the way you feel like it is, and exercise your language rights. If you or anyone who English is not their native language, they certainly need to be getting consent forms, meeting notices in their native language. They should be getting evaluations translated. And if they're not getting IEPs translated, they should be asking for that. These are the types of records, to keep that you can certainly request and ask for, and always just keep it. You never know when something goes awry and you might need to speak with an advocate or attorney, or maybe in a few years, you're going to be speaking with someone who's just coming into the special education realm and you want to show them this is what an IEP looks like. This is what an OT evaluation looks like. Things can be on, USBs, and you keep them on your computer now. They take up less space. A few years ago, I wanted to see what something was on my brother's IEP. I know where the file cabinet in my parents' house is, where they keep all of these hard copies because it's from 20 years ago. And I went and I looked and put it back. You never know when you might need to look at these documents. So some red flags, that you don't have evaluative information. A district has lowered or removed a service with no reason. A child's regressing. They're frequently getting suspended, or behavior issues are happening, right? Frequent suspension or discipline, frequently visiting the nurse, right? And you find, you look at the records and it turns out they're having the behavior issues or going to the nurse, and it's during ELA class, and they have a learning disorder, right? So, these are some red flags to just be aware of. And so lastly, I just want to quickly talk about, legal assistance and why you might, need or think you need to reach out to someone. We can review, a child's records, initiate that due process hearing, essentially suing a school district to enforce their special education rights, go to the hearing, and appeal if necessary. Questions to ask attorneys if you are reaching out to them: what will the cost be? What are their billing practices? Do they have conflicts, right? Are they representing parents and at the same time they're representing boards of educations or school districts? And how many hearings have they handled? And so why might a family need to or think that they want to maybe do a due process complaint? And that's because there's different types of relief available. Just checking time, we're almost done, I promise. Different types of relief available. One really important one is something called stay put or pendency. And that says that, if a district recommends something that a parent does not agree with and they file a due process complaint, they need to assert their stay put rights, but everything stays the same as per that last agreed upon IEP. So for instance, Johnny's been in 611 class, 611 class, 611 class. And now he's going to go up to middle school and the school district says, we're going to put him in ICT or general education. And you're thinking, whoa, 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 what are you talking about, district? I don't agree with this. We're suing, we are asserting our stay put right. Everything stays the same as the last IEP we agreed with until this due process is over, whether we settle and agree or the hearing officer says what the district recommended is appropriate, or they say it's not appropriate. And again, it goes the other way, right? It can go with services as well. So student has had feeding therapy, or a one-to-one paraprofessional, and all of a sudden they remove or lower it. Certainly you could assert stay put. It's not for every hearing request, but right, if they're doing something quite dramatic, you might say, guys, we're asserting our stay put right. Things need to stay as they are, because if not, something really is gonna, the student's schedule is gonna be messed up. Makeup services, compensatory relief, right? So you file a due process complaint and you can ask for makeup services, right? That can be makeup tutoring, so academic tutoring, or maybe they need makeup ABA, applied behavior analysis, to help in a lot of different areas, but also makeup related services, right? Maybe they haven't been providing speech ever, and they should have been. We need all that made up. Maybe they've been giving speech twice a week, and the student really should have been getting it 5 times a week. We need that made up. Appropriate IEP and placement, right? Getting an appropriate program in place, getting a new placement, and something called IEEs, independent educational evaluations. We recommend, if you're interested in this, that you reach out to an attorney. It does not need to be us or our firm, but these can get a little technical and procedural. Parents have a right to disagree with district evaluations per recent case law. Those are only those initial evaluations and those 3-year reevaluations. So any evaluations in between that time do not count. You cannot disagree with them and get an independent evaluation to be funded by the district. But you do have a right if it's that initial or reevaluation. However, you have to include certain language when you ask for it. The district must either authorize what you've requested or file their own due process complaint to defend what they've done. If they do nothing, you might have to file so you can get your evaluations. So it can get a little tricky, which is why we recommend, speaking with an attorney. And so again, legal assistance is available and affordable. we can review records, we can participate in a mandatory help you prepare for this resolution process that's required, represent you at the hearings. But what's really important is there's a fee shifting provision in the federal law that says school districts, if a parent has to sue you to enforce their child's special education rights, and they are the prevailing party, school district, you have to pay their reasonable attorney's fees. So for our litigation cases, we do them on a sliding scale. So parents might pay nothing. And if we win, the district pays everything. Parents might pay a retainer fee, which can vary. We have families fill out financial data forms. So if they really cannot afford to pay a retainer, then they're not going to. If they can pay something nominal, then that's what we'll ask them to pay. It's a sliding scale. And then if we win, the school district will pay our reasonable attorney's fees. Again, I also can provide advocacy at meetings. I can be in the background, so school districts don't need to know, but that is a fee for service. Again, keep a file of your child's records. You never know. You might want to go back and say, wait, have we had this goal for the last 3 years? Has Johnny made any progress? You never know when you might want to look at these records for any reason. So always just keep records. That's it. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you so much. That was so informative and I think really helpful for all of us. So we really appreciate it.